Okay, welcome everyone. I'm sorry, you can see we're doing a little last-minute organizing up here. My name is Ellen Alberding, for those of you whom I have not met before, and I'm president of the Joyce Foundation, which is a Chicago-based foundation. We focus on public policy issues, and I'd love it if somebody closed the door. Oh, great. Thank you. We focus on public policy issues, and we have developed a big interest in how prizes and competitions can be used in the public sector. And as you all know so well and have already heard a lot earlier today, a lot of the big advances and big exciting things that have happened in prizes and competitions have been traditionally in the sciences, in engineering. NASA has been great. And our interest in prizes early on was how can you apply some of those techniques and strategies in the public policy world that we work in, and in particular in education, employment, and environment issues. We have an incredible panel here today, but I'm really excited to be introducing these folks because each of them has run a competition or a prize in the public sector with some really great outcomes. We're gonna run this panel in a very sort of traditional way, in that each of them is going to take about 5 minutes to give a high-level overview of how they set their project up, what the goals were, and what the outcomes were. And each of them has really quite a distinct story to tell. Then I'll do some Q&A with the panel, and then there will be plenty of time, well, not plenty of time, but there will be time for Q&A from the audience. But I would encourage you, if you want to jump in at any time, wave your arm around, and if I don't see you, get somebody else to wave their arm around and point at you, and let's have a dialogue, because we've got a lot of people in the room who are, I hope, going to launch prizes themselves, so this is a learning opportunity for everybody. So first, immediately to my left and first on your right is Peter Levin. He's Senior Advisor to the Secretary and Chief Technology Officer, that's what CTO is, at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And Peter has run a competition that relates to people, veterans in particular, getting access to their healthcare data. Then we have Joan Lupinacci, who's the director of the Energy Star program. Many of you may be familiar with the Energy Star logo. And Joan, amazingly, has run a prize competition with a huge number of participants that had no money involved, which is very exciting. A great example of how people will participate in prizes and competitions even if the reward is not a cash reward. Vicki Purewal has run the NESTA Big Green Challenge, and we're really interested in this challenge because it is a challenge that involves whole communities and getting people to participate communally in energy saving and green activity, which I think is fascinating. And on my far left and your far right is Josh Wyner, who is at the Aspen Institute and, fortunately for the Joyce Foundation, agreed to launch and run the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence. And that prize is really interesting, not only because the Joyce Foundation is one of its funders, and Josh has done such a great job, but because he is trying to move through this prize an entire industry or complex of community colleges around the United States. So it's a participation prize, but it's also an effort to showcase excellence and get others to emulate the excellence that we're rewarding through the prize. So each of them has a slightly different angle, but I've asked them to tell their story in a way that will demonstrate to you not only why they did it and how they did it, but what some of the results are. 5 minutes each, and then we'll go to Q&A. Would you like to start?
My pleasure. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the VA's competition infrastructure. So let me start by posing you a question and put you in the position and the choice that Jim Sparrows, who's somewhere in the audience, and there he is in the back, he and I had to make about a year ago. And I'll do this in a very abstract way, which is, so you have a colossal problem that you're trying to solve, right? And in my world, this is typically around one of two issues. It's either around claims processing, which I won't talk about today, but I could because we ran a competition there too, or in electronic health records. These are the records that your physician or your clinical provider knows about you that you may or may not have access to. And it's sometimes because they don't want to give them to you, but it's mostly because they don't know how to give them to you. Or personal health records, which is information that you know about yourself, which is the competition that Jim and I organized and ran last summer. But here's the deal. We've got an enormous problem. I'll give you one. I'll give you a different one. So at the VA, where we serve 6 million independent or unique veterans every year, so some of them we see more than once, but we see 6 million of them every year, sometimes because they cut their finger, sometimes because they need heart surgery, sometimes because they have an acute condition, sometimes because they need mental health services, for example, something that's been in the news recently. We have a huge scheduling problem. If you want to call us up and try to schedule an appointment, it's a nightmare. It's undignified, it's slow, it's inefficient, it's not the customer service that we're accustomed to in practically every other part, especially in our commercial and societal lives. So I'll pose you the question. So we want to build a scheduling package, right? Let me tell you that the last one we tried cost $100 million, and it failed. We're now in 2012, we turned it off in 2009, it doesn't work. So imagine that we have something, scheduling's a good one, Blue Button for All Americans is another good one. Imagine that we have a scheduling package that we're trying to build, and here's the deal. You can spend the next 3 months to 36 months of your life trying to come up with an encyclopedic description of the requirements, and then you get to go out into industry and say, who thinks they could make me one of these? For $100 million, I tell you. And you better choose wisely. Because if you screw that decision up, you're going to spend another $100 million and you're still not going to have a scheduling package. Or you can do it this way. You can say, here is a list of requirements. By the way, it's not perfect. I'm not even 100% sure I'm asking the right questions, but I think I am. I think I'm asking the right questions. And we're going to have a dialogue first. And I think that this sort of matches in a qualitative way what it is you think you have in the private sector, in the industrial market, and what it is I think I need in the public sector. So the most important thing about running these contests is the quality of the questions. And then you say, hey, by the way, if you win, you may not know or you may not remember that I did this for $100 million last time. I'm not going to pay you $100 million this time. You screwed that up. I'm going to pay you 10. Now I'm making these numbers up. By the way, the $100 million is real. The $10 million, I don't know. I'm making that part up. But I'm going to give you something a lot less, and I'm going to see if you already have it before I start paying you for it. Oh, and by the way, if you already have it, maybe 2 or 3 of your competitors do too, and now we're going to do a bake-off. Now, all of a sudden, the situation is different. All of a sudden, we know whether these things are actually available, whether they can integrate to our platform, whether we can do this in an iterative and flexible process. So that's the story that we're about to have. Let me tell you very briefly the story that we did do. I had exactly the same problem a year ago. Jim and I work very closely on this thing called Blue Button. You might have heard of it. It's a personal health record, so not the big, comprehensive, clinically valid EHR, but the small, text-based ASCII file that's a PHR, personal health record. What's your name? Where do you live? What kind of medications are you taking? Do you remember? Because sometimes you don't. Do you remember the surgeries that you have? And we're starting to now open the aperture of what's in this PHR. Lest you think that this is an academic exercise, we're pushing 1 million subscribers already between the VA, DoD, and HHS. And now what we want to do is expand the aperture to everybody. So how do you solve that problem? It's exactly the same thing I was describing a second ago with the scheduling. So I can say $100 million to the first person who gets, pick your favorite number, to the first person who gets some number of physicians to sign on. Or I can say, here's the prize. Be the first. Tell me that you have that list already. And we made the number up. It was, I forget, Jim, 50K? How much? $25,000, okay? I'm sorry?
25,000.
25,000 clinical providers, I think was.
Not
okay.
that I'm telling you how you ran your session or anything, but.
Okay. So let me finish this up real quickly. It works. Don't spend a lot of time with these encyclopedic requirements and then choose once and choose wisely. Spend as little time as you can get away with. Be specific. Tell me what it is that you're looking for. And by the way, if you're going to be subjective, tell me that you're going to be subjective. I can live with that. I come from the private sector. I know how to finesse these things. Don't let the lawyers tell you that you can't. We've got a law that says you can. Remember, the lawyers work for you. You don't work for them, right? And try to imagine, yeah, that's supposed to get the laugh. And try to imagine a world where you actually are opening the aperture of people who can see in a very transparent, accessible, participatory way the problems that you're trying to solve. If I get another 5 minutes at the end of the discussion, I'll tell you about 10 more where we're running these kinds of competitions and where we have, at least in the case of the VA, homeless services applications, the blue button that I've just talked about, tens of thousands of employees participating in industry competitions and employee competitions inside the VA, solving our most difficult problems. Again, many thanks for.
Let me just ask you one question right away,
Sure.
and then we'll move on to Jean. So you're talking about giving up control, it seems, at the beginning. I know you're arguing that you have more control at the end, but at the beginning, it's like you're standing on one of those high dive things in the pool, and you're just like, that's like a frightening thing when you're used to being able to control everything at the front end.
Yeah.
So how do you address that?
That control that you think you have,
That-
it's a big fat lie. Because you don't control nothing. You don't control the procurement process. Somebody else is doing that for you. You hardly control the requirements process. And in fact, what we're trying to convince people of is that by being a little bit more flexible, by being a little bit conformal to what is already out there in industry, you're actually going to get a much better result. You're going to get instead, the homeless app, we just announced this last week. This was, in case you didn't know, this is the John Bon Jovi VA collaboration with HUD to provide web-enabled services for the people who take care of homeless people, right? And imagine how this would have looked from the data sets, from the procurement, from the requirements. It would take 10 years before we would have gotten something. We put this thing together in 28 days. We had a very, very specific list, very short and specific list of things that they were supposed to do. And we said, we hope this works, right? And it did. The trick was first 5 across the line that could meet those requirements. We got them 28 days later, and we just announced them last week. So the short answer to your question is you're not in control even when you think you're in control.
Jean?
Well, I think we were in a little control of our, but we were doing a kind of a very different thing. And what I wanted to point out is that the effort that I'm going to talk about, this national building competition, the Battle of the Buildings, lives within the Energy Star program. And so it's really not meant to be bigger than the Energy Star program. But what we did, and what you're seeing just running behind me, are just some pictures to give you a feel for what the competition was trying to get at. So you're just seeing some photos from various elements of who competed in the Battle of the Buildings.
Hair. Yeah, that's good. I like that guy.
So I'm not talking to those, but you'll just see them in the back. And the point was that we wanted to raise awareness around the fact that commercial buildings use energy, and as a result of their energy use, that the environment is being impacted, and that's greenhouse gas emissions. And that's the core mission of what the EPA is looking to do, and that's reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we do it through Energy Star. The competition lives within that mission, and the competition is not meant to be the whole of the program. We have an entire program around providing guidance and tools and resources and ways to reduce energy use. This had very specific goals, and the goals here were to raise awareness in the mainstream about the link between energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, and that everybody can play a role in making these reductions. And in fact, the goal was kind of to bring what usually is a boiler room kind of an issue to the forefront. We wanted people to be talking about what they can do to save energy. And so we knew there was a lot of waste. We knew to get the waste, every individual can play a role, and this was our platform from which to do this. So from the design standpoint, we had tried to come up with a very easy to understand thing. And in fact, we did a weight loss analogy. And I think when Todd talked in the other room, he said one of the competitions he spoke about was the American Idol sort of version. Well, this one is the Biggest Loser kind of version. It was exactly modeled to be like that television show, meaning that we were going to chronicle how buildings and their teams reduced energy. And at the end, the prize was bragging rights. We didn't have money, we didn't have anything like that. This is what people were getting. They were getting, I'm the winner, I'm the, I saved the most. And so, while the competition sort of goal was something easy to understand, it needed to be rooted in transparent information and a way of actually measuring results. This was purely stepping on the scale at the end of the competition. Whoever saved the most in terms of energy use per square foot was the winner. We had a tool that we already had to make the measurements. We also added verification in to make sure that, in fact, the data was good and accurate. So what I'm hoping we'll do in the conversation is be able to talk about some of the strategies we use. Clearly, while they weren't winning money from EPA, they were gaining money from the energy savings, and they were building teams and team spirit. And that was really a big part of what this tried to accomplish. And what EPA brought to it was a platform that provided social media, a way to build a community, some tools and resources so they can bring the word out to their own community. So what you saw behind us were students participating, students bringing the message in their own business community, help us, participate with us. There's lots of that kind of excitement. And in the end, I would say we're now going into year 3. We thought we would do it one time and raise awareness and have some excitement. And after we finished, we had people beating our door down. When can we compete? When can we get involved? We want to. So now it's become our 3rd year, and we've gone from highlighting just 14 buildings to having 3,800 buildings participate this year. So I would just end with a couple of my high-level takeaways from what we learned, and then hope that we'll have some conversation about some of the tactics and other things. But I think it was really important for us to actually have a goal and some core principles and stick to it. We had to be flexible along the way, but we didn't want to be flexible so much that we were not adhering to our core goals. We wanted the competition to be sustainable, and therefore it did live within something that we already have in an existing infrastructure, and that did allow it to be sustainable. We were keeping it short and simple. You can't lose the people's interest. I think you mentioned something like 28 days in your focus. Saving energy takes a long time. It does do that. But if you tell people you're competing for 2 years, they're not really going to stick with you. That's what we learned. So we tried to make the actual competition period about 6 months of actual tweeting and all the rest of the things. You need to differentiate. You can't just take this good idea and apply it to everything. You have to actually make it suit your needs and know what your need is. And lastly, you can be inventive. And we didn't have any money, and we weren't offering anything like that. But we really did energize an entire group of people, even an audience that we don't typically reach. These, the participants really in our mind were the students in the schools, the nurses and doctors in the hospitals, the kids in the dorms. They loved that competition. And that's who we were reaching. And you can do that without offering money if that's not, because we're not solving some big, expensive problem. That's not what our competition was designed
Well,
to
speaking
do.
of people you were reaching, you may not have realized you were reaching Rahm Emanuel, but he launched a challenge last week in Chicago that is so similar to what you're talking about. And I think 14 buildings signed up. It's 14 million square feet of commercial buildings in Chicago, and they are competing to reduce their energy use by 20% in 5 years. Do I have that number? Yeah, I got the numbers right there. And it's exactly, it's not part of your challenge, but he obviously borrowed, or somebody lifted your ideas, and Secretary Chu came out and announced it. So it was really great.
Yeah, I do want to say that this is a common approach, is to challenge and to have buildings compete. And we work with a lot of jurisdictions around the country that have their own, just like what Rahm Emanuel launched. There's things called watts to water, there's kilowatt crackdowns, mostly that's the names of them. And many of them, almost all of them, use the Energy Star measurement and tracking systems as the basis for that. But where we're giving this kind of national recognition, in the local communities, they're giving like Mariner tickets to the winner who does, fun and exciting things for the local communities. So they can all really work together, actually.
Part of the point that I'm trying to make is that this national effort that's coming out of Washington has real legs in communities all over the country. Whether it's officially part of it or not, it's clearly modeled on and reacting to the efforts that Jean and her team have put forward and are getting recognition for. Let's hear from across the pond.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me over to the US. I'm really excited to be here and to learn from all the great work that's going on over here as well. It's a really exciting time for challenge prizes over here, so I think we've got a lot to learn from you guys. So from 2007 to 2009, I led something called the Big Green Challenge at NESTA. So just to put NESTA into context for you, NESTA is the UK's innovation foundation. At the time of running the Big Green Challenge, we were what we call a non-departmental public body. It gets called a QANGO, an arm's length organisation. We actually just recently became a charity. So in the context of this, we were an arm's length government organisation. We were set up with an endowment from the National Lottery. So the Big Green Challenge was a £1 million prize accessible for the community-based groups who could have the biggest impact in measurable reductions in CO2 emissions in their community over a year. There's a little bit of a different context to this prize, I think, to the one you've just heard about, in that it's not the prize itself that was the innovation to achieve the CO2 reductions. The prize was trying to find the new innovations from community groups that would achieve CO2 reductions. So it kind of sounds straightforward, but the more we had to keep reminding ourselves of that in the competition as we were designing it. And our aims around setting it up really echoed a lot of what Jean and what Ellen was saying this morning about recognising the power of citizens to come up with innovations that might achieve quite radical change. Communities were seen as important in tackling climate change at the time in the UK, but they weren't seen as a kind of credible source of innovation or achieving kind of really significant measurable CO2 reductions. The competition ran for about 2.25 years from starting to market to awarding the prize, and there was obviously some time pre and post prize as well. So I'm going to take you through, I've lost a bit of the, I'm going to take you through some of the features. I mean, just really quickly, a lot of what you heard this morning, setting a clearly defined goal and measure of success, but not prescribing the means of achieving that goal, and being open to who could develop the innovation that would meet that goal was really core. But we combined that with a staged approach and providing financial and non-financial support. I'm going to talk a little bit about the support. It was really important. Both the staging and the support provided a way of de-risking the process of taking part for competitors. Because if you look at some of the other models, particularly of the kind of scale of prize that we were talking about, for a community group, this would have been a massive risk to enter the prize and just to kind of blindly go forward, to deliver something, to try and mobilise the resources, and then risk not getting anything at the end of it. So it was partly to do with that, partly because we didn't want to demotivate lots of unsuccessful entrants. So part of our aim was finding the innovations that were most successful in terms of measurable results, but also it was about galvanising communities of people around the issue as well. So we needed something that was going to kind of keep that momentum. We had a principle for ourselves that whenever a competitor left the competition, they should leave in a stronger position than when they started. That was a kind of principle we set ourselves. And we also learned along the way that the support we offered was actually a motivator and as an incentive for some participants as much, if not more, than the end prize. The end prize was important for getting the media attention we wanted and getting out to reach a completely new audience. So The staged process, tell you a little bit more about it. We had a very, very open first stage, open to any non-profit UK team of more than one person. You didn't even have to be constituted in the beginning, which was that's a really risky thing for a statutory funder to do. And actually the staging helped de-risk the process for us as much as for the competitors as well. We weren't giving any money out of the first stage, so it doesn't matter if they weren't constituted. And it allowed us, by not asking for track record, it allowed us to really help find some groups who would never have applied to this kind of scheme or any other kind of grant scheme or procurement exercise. But the only other thing we didn't allow was statutory bodies other than parish councils, which is our most local kind of tier of local government. So we got 355 eligible entrants. We then picked 100 of them to receive support through workshops, regional workshops, and one-to-one support to develop their ideas. 88 of them put in then detailed plans. The 12 that didn't put them in deselected themselves on the basis that they started to kind of realise what they've gotten themselves into. And some of them realised that when they apply for grant funding, and I've been a fundraiser, so I know that you do this, you can kind of twist what you do a little bit to try and get the grant funding.
No, really?
Really? So you can go, we kind of fit in there. We kind of no. But you can't do that with this process. This has to be really kind of core part of what you're trying to do, and you have to really commit to it. So a few deselected partly because of that. So 21 of them were invited to pitch to judges, and we gave them some support in how you pitch your ideas. 10 finalists then received social business advice, CO2 monitoring advice, and £20,000 to test and measure their impact of their idea over a period of 12 months. We worked really closely with them over that time. The people who left the competition at that point, many of them had never worked up an idea into a project plan or a business plan. So then they had something that they could take to other funders and that they could take forward within their communities. In the end, we selected 3 winners and one runner-up. 3 winners got £300,000 and the runner-up got £100,000. And all of the finalists had the option of some follow-up support for their next plans. Running out of time, I've got loads to say. So the criteria we applied was quantitative criteria on measurable CO2, innovation, longevity and potential for scale. It was really important that the innovations we found could be sustained beyond the life of the competition, and community engagement. A couple of things we learned about the staging process: having clear timetable and aims provided focus and momentum, which a lot of the participants really appreciated. But on the flip side, it was quite stressful and tiring for some of them, and it was the support. It's really important to bear in mind for this kind of prize that the moral support as well as the kind of business advice was really important. The staging helped us to find generally new competitors, and also being able to provide support along the way. It meant that they could find the right constitution that would enable them to be sustainable and have the support that enabled them to develop the idea and to test it in the way that was going to set them up well long term. I said we stayed in close contact with people, close two-way communication with competitors from the entry stage right through the whole process is really important, and you can learn a lot that way as well. And I just pick up a point that Jean made about flexibility. So we were really clear, and we did not shift in what the goal was, but we did remain flexible in what support we offered and kind of how we structured the price. So for example, we changed the frequency of the carbon data reporting from monthly, which we quickly realised was way too onerous for people, to just 2 or 3 points in the year. And we also realised how much value the competitors put on just reaching the earlier stages of the competition. So we created logos that we hadn't planned for to say Big Green Challenge, Top 100, Top 21, and people put them on their website and got quite a lot of leverage, a lot more support from them. These are some of our winners, which I can tell you about later. Just to point out that the top left, the Green Valleys. They applied being called the 3 Green Valleys, but they had to drop the 3 because they've ended up working with communities, about 17 communities across the Brecon Beacons area of Wales. They are now advising the Welsh Assembly government on kind of energy policy. Like they're incredible. They were a non-constituted group of people. There was a guy who was an accessibility officer for the national park who had a passion for micro hydro systems, who kind of mobilised a community with support, set up a community interest company, which they didn't even know what that was previously, and that was exactly the right constitution to set them up and be sustainable. But I can tell you about the others if you want. We had 12% of the entrants were brand new groups who didn't exist before the competition. Around 10% were developing completely new ideas, and around 50% were looking to take forward an idea that they hadn't previously had an opportunity to progress. I can say stuff if that's useful in the Q&A about some things we learned about reaching competitors. That might be of interest. And just quickly to tell you about our results. So the finalists achieved 10 to 46% CO2 reduction over 12 months. For those of you not in that sector, our UK government target was 38% reductions on 1990 levels by 2020. So this smashed some of that target. And 4% was the average UK cut over 2 years. So up to 46% in a year is really serious. So this was kind of, this demonstrated to people that the community-led action on climate change, community-led innovation could be taken seriously. And actually that helped us to leverage, each of the finalists leveraged their own funding. One of them leveraged the runner-up, who received 100,000, leveraged another 800,000 on top of that. And we also leveraged from our Department of Energy and Climate Change, which was created during the life of this prize. They looked at the results. Another good thing is to kind of keep other relevant departments informed of what's happening as you go, because it just turned out that they were looking to support community-led innovation on climate change because, this looks like actually it could be something a bit serious. And they decided to put £600,000 into supporting 17 of the competitors who didn't become finalists to help them take their work forward as well. So you can, as an organiser of the prize, as well as your competitors leveraging other new volunteers and other support, you can also play a role if you're committed to doing it, of being a kind of convener of the results that come out and kind of pulling together evidence that's more than the sum of its parts from all of the competitors and presenting that to the right kind of people to influence wider change. So I need to stop talking, but
we're going to move on to Josh, but I just have one clarifying question. Is the challenge still going on?
No, the challenge was, so the way NESTA works is that we kind of run demonstrator projects to kind of sort of unearth new findings in innovation and to trial new ways of funding. So it was meant as that. All of the finalist projects are still running, and many of the non-finalist projects are still running as well that we know of, and I can talk a little bit about that later. We've also just set up a new centre for challenge prizes similar to the Centre for Collaborative Innovation here. So part of the legacy is that we're now helping to support government departments and charitable foundations to run similar prizes.
Thank you very much. Josh.
Thanks. Thank you, Ellen. You mentioned the support that Joyce has provided to the prize. What you didn't mention is the thought leadership at the beginning of the prize that Joyce provided, along with some other foundations and folks in the Department of Education, Department of Labor. OSTP has been a great supporter of this. So just opening remark is that this is something that requires a village, so to speak. And particularly the issue that we were trying to address. So I don't know how much folks here know about higher education. We have, roughly 25 million students in not graduate education, but in sort of what you think of as college in this country, and a little over half of them are in community colleges. There are 7 million students in community colleges seeking degrees or other credentials, another 6 million who are in remedial education or looking to improve their their work skills to get back into the labor markets or continuing in the labor markets. They need to be retrained while they have their job. So we have 13 million people, and we have really no recognition of this sector until recent years. So the Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence is a $1 million prize for the best community college each year. It's split between the winner that gets $600,000 or $700,000 and then a few runners-up who share the remainder of the prize. And one of the goals is simply to get this sector recognized. We have the U.S. News and World Report that recognizes a small segment of colleges, but we really don't recognize community colleges that will soon be educating half of the degree-seeking students in the country. The second is that community colleges are underperforming. No matter how you count it, only about 40% of the students succeed in either getting a degree or moving on, transferring to another college. So there's a second challenge. One is under recognition, the second is underperformance. There's a third, which is that because community colleges have so many different things that they do workforce training, it's the first 2 years of a 4-year degree, they do remedial education, there's really no shared definition of what excellence looks like in this sector. And then finally, we don't know enough about success at scale. So notwithstanding the fact that we have this 30 to 40% success rate, graduation rates range from 5% to 80-something%, right? I mean, that's a huge range. And we talk about community colleges as though they're this monolith, as though they're a single thing. So the Aspen Prize really had several goals. One was to elevate the sector of community colleges. In the last couple of years, as state budgets have gone down, higher education always suffers more than other segments, and community colleges within higher education suffer more. So we're seeing in a big way just how important it is that this sector gets recognition so that we don't disinvest in it as we have in the past. Or invest more is the positive way, I suppose, of putting that. Secondly, so the first is recognition as a goal. Second is definition. We've got to get the sector coalescing around a definition of excellence, right? And you've got to have a benchmark for what it means to be good if people are going to see what the best actors are and then drive towards those particular activities that those institutions are engaged in. So recognition first, definition second. Third is identification, right? What are the practices that lead to high levels of student success? The growing part of the population in education right now is Hispanic and low-income students. Those are the fastest growing groups. They are also underperforming. We're not going to meet our national goals for preparing the next generation to drive the economy unless colleges do much better on that account. So we've got to identify those colleges that are doing it. Not little programs for 50 or 100 students, but whole colleges, whole community colleges. Some of these have 50, 60, 70,000 students that are really seeing unexpectedly high gains and start to drive everybody towards those institutions to figure out how to get better. So those were the three goals: recognition, definition, and identification. Let me talk about a few of the lessons from the prize. We had a 3-stage competition as well. I don't want to get into too much of that detail. Happy to answer questions about that. Let me just get into 3 or 4 lessons that we learned from the prize. The first is that you've got to, for us, we had to involve the field in both the outcomes at the back end, but the process at the front end. Look, prizes for some people are things that come in Cracker Jack boxes, right? And they are, right? You say, I work on a prize. Oh, some people turn the other way. They think it's kitschy. To move that from that idea to an idea of being taken seriously in the field, you've got to involve people in the field. You've got to listen to them. You've got to do your homework, do your research. And for us, one of the big lessons was that you have to look at context. Not all community colleges have the same kinds of students. Some of them are going right into the workforce. Some of them are transferring. In California and Florida, a lot of them are transferring to selective schools. So we had to look at challenge, and this is a summary of what showed people how serious we were, that we were going to take seriously, that it wasn't going to be facile, that we were going to involve people in the process. So we had experts as key validators all the way throughout. That really was lesson 1. The second is that the greatest success probably didn't come from us, but it came from driving people to the colleges that are best. That huge amounts, the success of a prize is when lots of activity is happening that you don't know about. I think that one example of that is Valencia College, which was the winner, knew that they were in the top 10. And they had ready to go a donation from a local marketer who ran all the electronic billboards around Orlando. That's where they're located. 70,000 students, 50% minorities, exceptional transfer rates. Really a remarkable college. These went up the minute the prize was announced, all over Orlando, and stayed up for a long time. And the level of excitement that they had, and I know this is sort of a high-level result, and we can talk more about how this is really helping to change practice at the community college level, but we had no idea this was going to happen. This was one of the most impactful things that happened through this. And that really leads me to my third point, which is that you've got to develop close relationships with the prize winners and use them to drive success. People who are not successful, no matter how much you work to make sure that they're not disincentivized to participate in the future, they're not going to be your closest friends. The closest friends are going to be the leaders in the field. And when they're people that are recognized by others, appreciated by others, and interest starts to be driven towards them and what they're doing, you've got to make friends with them. You've got to promote that. You've got to push activity towards them. I think that really for us has been a big part of the lesson from the prize. And we see in so many ways, every campus I go to now that was in the top 10 has banners like this. They have embroidered T-shirts that say, we're named one of the top 10 community colleges in the country, one of the top community colleges, 5 community colleges in the country, the best community college in the country. And they're using that to attract resources, and they're using it to attract faculty and staff, but most importantly, that is driving a lot of attention to these institutions themselves. So those are a few lessons from the prize. Again, glad to talk about, this is something that needs to be done annually. I guess the one last thing that I will say is that we know that this is an enormous lift. Again, you're talking about 1,200 community colleges in the country, systems that have been around for decades. And we don't think that we're going to do it alone, but we also know that what we're going to be able to do is going to take several years. And so I think that the longevity of the prize and the repeating the prize is a way of addressing something that may be a deeper challenge than doing it just once. And so matching how many times it will be repeated to the depth of the challenge, how many years the problem has existed, how significant it is, how resistant the sector may be to change, I think that match is really important in our thinking. So let me stop there and
Thanks, and we're going to take questions. Let me just start with one, and then let's get some questions from the audience. But I guess this is more of a comment, Josh, and to those of you who would be sponsoring prizes where you've got a particular point of view, you want to see something happen, one of the things that the Joyce Foundation was really interested in was not just rewarding the schools that have high graduation or completion rates, but we were really interested in, are these community colleges actually placing their graduates into jobs? And that was a number that a lot of community colleges did not want to talk about. And it's not data that's easily available in a lot of cases. And we could have given up on that. We could have said, well, okay, that's going to make this harder, and it's going to mean fewer applicants and so on. And Whitney Smith, sitting in the audience here, really insisted on that. And the result, I think, is a much stronger competition, even though we got a lot of pushback from people in the data world saying, oh, the data doesn't exist, or, oh, you know. Josh, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I think generally, so one of the reasons community colleges say, well, we really can't measure. In fact, I had a couple of people who have been friends in the field, I've been working in education for some time, in higher education, who said, I don't want to be involved in a ranking of community colleges. That's not right to do that. And one of the things behind their statement is the data just aren't good enough, and you can't get the data on labor market outcomes. That was one of the things. So when we got to our final 10, we went to every state in which the final 10 were located, and we had the colleges give the states a list of all their graduates from 2005 and 2010. We said, tell us how many are employed in the state and what their average salaries are. We didn't get it in ways that violated privacy. We protected privacy, so we dealt with that issue, and we got it back for all 10. Ultimately, when we debriefed the community colleges after the prize competition, we gave them all long debriefings to talk to them. Several of them said, where'd you get that data? I didn't think you could get that data. And we're now having a forum with Google downtown in DC to talk exactly about this, which is how do we get the data into the hands of more community colleges and more colleges generally so they can start using it. So one of the things I think that a prize can do, particularly if it involves difficult issues of measurement, is you got to give that prize out at the back end. And if you don't shy away from the difficult issues of measurement, if you go at them and try to use the best data you've got, you might just be able to break through with a new kind of measurement that others thought was impossible to do or too difficult to do at any kind of scale. And if you do it, and they can see the data, and you know that they know that you recognize the nuances, I think we're part of a group that has a chance of moving the field in that direction.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, did you find that by setting such a high benchmark that you lost some interest in the lowest performing community colleges, or did they seem really motivated to try to reach that high benchmark over maybe the next couple of competitions?
Yeah, it's a great question. With 1,200 community colleges, the way we ran the competition is that we invited them all to apply. We looked at federal data for all of them, and we only invited the top 10% to even apply for the prize. So they didn't, and so the question is really relevant to the other 90%. I think it's fair to say that those that are really, really low performing, we've reached out to try to encourage them to learn about what the sector is doing, and we've had some success with those folks. There are also states that have asked us to come present to them and strategize with them. I'm going to Oregon, for instance, later this year. Oregon had no colleges in the top 120, yet they want us to come and speak to their trustees. They want us to come speak to the system folks about what is it that we are seeing. So I think while it's true that very low-performing community colleges may not be incentivized to participate, I think that the systems that they're in and the colleges themselves that want to get better will be using some of the identification of practice work that we've been doing.
Yes, in the back.
This is just a general question. So the foundations, like the Joyce Foundation and the Aspen, they all had prizes that were open only to a certain select group. And I wonder, like the federal agencies, your contests were open to everyone in the country. So I wonder, is that like, if it's coming from a federal agency, do we have that ability to just limit it to certain types of people or to a certain group of entities? Or
I
does
don't
it
think
have
there's anyone, well, can you answer that question, Peter?
I can answer the silhouette of the question, which is
An artful response.
apropos competition. I'm not 100% sure, but here's what I do know: that in other procurements we can. So there are mechanisms for pre-selection. There are mechanisms for qualification, past performance. One of the panelists said that in fact one of the great advantages of competition is that you actually don't take into account past performance, which I think is great. You're taking into account outcomes. When it comes to competition specifically, we only tried to broaden the aperture. We never actually tried to close it. And I think that the only qualification was that you had to be a U.S. citizen. So we didn't actually try to go the other way. I'm sure that there's a way to do it. We wouldn't have done it that way for policy reasons.
Yes.
That's a question for Vicki. You provided NESTA, provided significant support to the 355, to the as you narrowed down. Do you have a big staff, or did you leverage different capabilities like the business support?
No, that's a good question. I meant to, if I had all the time in the world, I would have mentioned that. And were you in the session this morning about partnerships? Okay, so there was a session this morning about partnerships. So we talked about, I can't remember what the three different types were. There was a kind of lead, kind of convener, and a contributor. That wasn't quite the right title, but so we were kind of somewhere between the lead and the kind of convener, coordinator. And so we did work with partners. We were a really small team who ran the prize, and at some points it was me. But there's so we had about 5 partners in total, but some of them weren't on board for all of it. So we worked with an organisation called CRED, who were a foundation for social entrepreneurs in the UK, and they had a track record of giving people business advice, social business advice, who'd never developed social businesses before. They hadn't got prize experience, but that we took that experience they had was really relevant. We worked with CRED, who are the carbon reduction team at the University of East Anglia, to provide the carbon reduction advice and also to do the analysis of the final results. We worked with, and then we commissioned a couple of web agencies, one to build a website, one to develop the kind of online platform that the participants put their data into. We also had an advisory panel, picking up on the point about using relevant experts right from the beginning in design. So we had a panel, and then we also kind of on the design phase worked with people from both kind of CO2, climate change research experts, as well as people from community who represented the community sector.
Did you provide technical advice, or was it just the business advice?
The social business advice was from Unlimited, and we did provide some kind of technical advice was on the monitoring of CO2, not so much on how to reduce CO2. Or we did point people towards relevant organisations and websites on that if they hadn't worked on that before. The other thing that we did do actually was create some peer support. So we did in the marketing phase, we ran 10 regional workshops, and in the support for the 100, those workshops we built in networking time, and something we'd do again is build in more networking time because they loved that, and they all had different strengths. They all part of the beauty of them not going to a very specific type of group was that.
I see 3 hands, so why don't we start with you? We'll go with you and then in the back. And I think is it okay if we go 5 minutes over, everybody? Okay, I think we're going to need to.
So actually, it's fitting that you're talking about the market, but I was going to delve into that a little bit because the audiences you're talking about are very specific: hospitals, college students. How did you think about your audiences, and can you speak a little bit more to the outreach and communication on that? Was it through tapping into specific networks or reaching out individually? How did you do that?
Jane, do you want to grab that question?
Sure, I can. I mean, we did our work and outreach through our Energy Star program, and we have about 5,000 organizations that have already joined through Energy Star to reduce their energy use, and that is across the entire sectors of the buildings market. And so we had a ready-made audience already interested in doing that, and that's why it was easy for us to do the part that was around the marketing. The other thing, just to make a point about that peer networking, even though we were in a competition, a lot of the support came from the people who were friendly competing. And so we set up, and really a lot of what we set up was the opportunity for them to do peer-to-peer exchange of best practices, because there isn't one solution and everyone just learns from each other in the case of energy efficiency. And we also brought in the service providers and provided a way for them to provide expert blogging and advice also.
Josh?
Yeah, I think, so I want to talk about one unexpected audience, and that is researchers. And I sort of hit my head and think, right. So we have a data set that really has never been collected before. And we've got researchers calling every week, asking for access to this data set. And it's a very powerful way to move the field. If you've defined excellence, and we have 4-part definition of excellence, a couple of which really aren't used very much, but now they're all integrated with one another. And now when the researchers want to figure out, when they're trying to test what works and what doesn't, they're sort of stuck with our definition. And they're using it. They don't disagree with it, but now they're starting from that place. So we have people at the University of Wisconsin, we've got people at Columbia, Wisconsin, lots of places around the country now using our data to drive their investigation of what works. And so, one lesson is think about them at the front end. It might not change what you do, but in terms of outreach, it's a really easy group because they're hungry for good data frequently in a lot of fields.
I'll be really quick this time, I promise. This is a really important lesson. We really realised that it was quite hard to convince people about the whole prize mechanism within the sector that we were going out to. It's kind of community-based groups is a massive kind of, not really sector, but those who were used to applying for funding were used to applying for grant funding, and we had to work really hard to just explain how this was different. So the face-to-face roadshows and going out through networks was really important for being able to explain rather than just tell.
Yes.
Two questions for Vicki. One, the prize first when you were awarded, how was it spent? Do you have any restrictions on how it was spent? And second of all, can you give us a sense for how much the prize cost to design and run?
Okay. So on the first one, we tried to put a few restrictions on how the money was spent as possible, because the finalists have just proven themselves every year and achieved kind of amazing things. The only thing we had said is that it had to be spent for the benefit of the community that they've been working with. And then we had some of our standard kind of grant terms and conditions about, not doing anything illegal or, that kind of stuff. But it was very, very light touch, and we didn't have lots of milestones in the way that you would with a kind of standard grant contract. And then the cost to run, I would put a big caveat around this, because it was the first time it had been done, and we put a lot of research expertise around it, and it was quite heavy on evaluation so that we could use it to demonstrate what we'd learned about community-led climate change and about the prize model itself. So it costs us probably about 1.25 million to run the £1 million prize, but a lot of those costs you wouldn't need to run it again.
The cost of partners?
Yeah, so that includes the cost. Yes, it includes the cost of all of the partners, the evaluation, some additional research. You'll see on our website we've published some reports for a local government on how to approach working with communities on climate change and that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
My question is for Jean and for Vicki. Jean, you said that in terms of duration, in order to keep momentum going, keep the prize window short. You talked about a 6-month window. Versus with Vicki, it seems like the prize competition that you all ran was longer, and it was phased. And so, can you talk about those two experiences, and especially from Vicki on your end, how do you keep that momentum going, especially if you want to see sustained results?
Well, maybe I'll make a couple points since I brought that up, and then Vicki can fill in hers. While we kept the competition to a 6-month period, we actually compared energy use with a year's baseline and a year of current data. So when people applied, they already had to have their past year of baseline and almost 4 to 5 months of the current year. We kind of told them about competing so they could start thinking about it. But the window that we were doing public outreach and awareness was around 6 months. And that was because our primary target was the media, and they lose a lot of interest pretty quickly. So, and then the only other thing is we did have a couple of weigh-in points, just like the TV show. We had midpoint weigh-in and the final. And we did find that we had to do some modifications during those check-ins, because people began to lose interest if they didn't think they were going to win at all. And in fact, the one thing I wanted to say is we modified the competition a little bit over the course of the years. The first year, people applied and we chose the 14 buildings that were going to participate, just like the show where you just were chronicling these, set group, and they were competing against each other, and people really wanted to participate. So the next year we just made everyone compete, and then we thought we'd weed out during the year, but people didn't want to be weeded out either. They wanted to keep going. So there was a little bit of that. But that period where you're really in the public awareness and the networking and the peer exchange, we really have limited to about 6 months or so.
And we're going to wrap up right after this, and then I know 3 of the panelists, I think, can stick around, and Peter's got to leave, so I think we have an opportunity to interact one-on-one if you guys are willing. Yeah.
I guess, so sounds like we follow some similar principles on the data side. So we chose a year for delivery because we wanted to look at the effectiveness of the ideas over the year. And I guess we weren't in a position to be able to ask them to baseline the data until they got to a position of being the finalist, because A, they hadn't really finished defining their communities properly or defining their ideas properly, and B, we knew the year delivery was going to be a big commitment, so we didn't want to ask them to do the baseline until we knew that we selected them for that. And it was because they weren't just looking at buildings and everyone was looking at different things. It wasn't like they had that data ready available in the same way.
The
So-
scope is a little different.
Yeah, and on the timetable, the first application phase took 2 to 3 months. The stage of support for the 100 took about 2 to 3 months. The year felt about right. I don't think we could have pushed them any longer than that. I think just being really clear and upfront with timetable at the beginning is really important, so people know what they're getting themselves into. The only thing we should have built slightly more into our plan was we only gave them about a month to do their setup and baseline but they should have had like 3 months really.
So let's finish by asking each of the panelists one sentence, one piece of advice. Josh? Come on, you can do it. My
Can we
piece of
start that
advice, 2 words, do it. Josh?
I guess the advice would be to make sure that in addition to elevating the sector, actually I would say that spend an equal amount of time being serious about the measurement and being serious about the lessons learned. And I think that's really hard to do. I think it's easy to get internally focused on measuring things, putting out the back end information that you get at the back end, and it's hard to balance those two things. But spending an equal amount of time making sure that you measure and maintain credibility in the measurement, and then really learning as much as you possibly can, using this as a platform to get the information out to the sector.
Good.
I would say be brave and committed to it. Be really honest with your team and the competitors. Be really firm on the goal and be flexible on your approach and on learning along the way.
So I agree with all that, so I don't have to even repeat that. I think then I would focus on just be innovative in the sense of take advantage of the new technology and things like social media and your own partners in helping to spread the word and make it successful.
Well, I'd like to give a round of applause to a terrific panel and in absentia Peter. You guys are doing great work, and thank you very much.